Again, welcome. My name is Piper Hendricks. I'm the CEO of Stories Change Power, and we are so glad to have you here at our February webinar. Throughout 2026, we are recognizing the 250th anniversary of the United States Declaration of Independence, and we're focusing on boosting civic engagement, building civic muscle, and expanding civic imagination. I am freshly off a plane from Sao Paulo because Stories Change Power recognizes the ways that we can learn from Brazil in expanding our civic imagination. And I am delighted to, we'll include more about that in the follow-up email for folks who are joining us live and in the video description if you're watching the recording. For now, boa tarde from our friends who are joining from Brazil as we talk about a space where imagination has space to thrive, and that is the entertainment industry, specifically looking at film and Hollywood. I am delighted to be welcoming our today's speaker to dive into that topic with us. Before we get there, four quick housekeeping reminders. As a reminder, we have captions on, so please use those if they are helpful to you. We'll have the chat open throughout. That is open only to our human friends. Your AI is welcome to watch the recording, but if you are AI in the session right now, we will kick you out. We're going to check with folks first, so keep an eye on your direct chat. If you don't respond, we'll err on the side of caution to keep the space only for our human friends. Questions and answers. There's a space at the bottom of your screen, a Q&A. We welcome questions anytime. We will not read your full name. You also have the option to ask anonymously if you prefer. And any questions that we don't reach, we will aim to address later, including in our bonus points section on LinkedIn. Lastly, as a webinar, you are off camera and off mic, so do what you need to do to make yourself comfortable and be fully present this Friday afternoon. And pretty sure it's afternoon for everybody who's joining all the different time zones that we have joining in today. With that, it's an absolute pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Steven Olikara. Steven is a nationally recognized changemaker and entrepreneur who is working at the intersection of media, politics, and culture, as you'll hear today. He's the founding CEO of Bridge Entertainment Labs, or BEL, we'll use sometimes, BEL, harnessing the power of storytelling and entertainment to transform America's divisions. He's advised studios from Paramount to Disney on stories that unite Americans across lines of difference. Steven is a prominent voice in the pluralism and depolarization movement. He's a frequent commenter on national media, contributing to CBS News, CNN, NPR, Variety, and USA Today, to name just a few. He also serves as a senior fellow for political transformation at the USC Schwarzenegger Institute and is the founder of Future Caucus. If you are not familiar with that organization, we'll include a link. Highly recommend you check them out. They're an inspiring group. It is the largest cross-partisan organization of young elected officials in the United States. In 2022, Steven made history as the first South Asian candidate for U.S. Senate in Wisconsin, earning national recognition for his fresh approach to politics. His story is featured in the documentary The Reunited States, which you can find both on Amazon Prime and PBS. We'll include a link to that as well. As an avid musician and former radio DJ, Steven has co-authored the book JFK, The Last Speech on the Role of Arts in Democracy. Steven has also advised multi-platinum recording artists on their social impact initiatives. And as a proud Wisconsin native, he's a Truman Scholar, a Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree in 2017, and a World Economic Forum Global Shaper. Welcome, Steven. And if you can believe it, everybody, that was just a partial list of all that Steven has accomplished. Thank you for being with us today. You may be on mute here.
Yeah,
Well,
it's
yeah,
there we go.
there we
All
go.
right. Piper,
Welcome.
great to see you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Before I turn it over to dive into our content, we always like to start with a poll to get a sense of who's in the virtual room with us today. So we'll have that poll pop up soon. Just two questions today. Those of you who have joined us before will recognize this first one. The question is, how long have you been using your civic muscle? And that is a term that some may be familiar with, some might not, but it really gets to, are you involved in your community? Are you part of different organizations? Are you, how are you giving back and being engaged? And I'm seeing choices, some responses coming in already. Thank you. We've got options to, I'm new here, you've been here a good long while, you're a professional. Our second question, in your current work and or your civic life, where do you most directly engage with storytelling? And this is a fun one. You can pick as many as are applicable to you. Our options include creating stories on film, TV, podcasts, etc. Maybe you're shaping narrative through strategy and messaging. Maybe you're sharing stories to inform and inspire others to take action, my favorite kind of story. Maybe you're researching or analyzing stories and audiences. And then there's also something there if you're mostly here to learn and have not used storytelling in your work. So I've got good participation so far. We'll keep the poll open for just another moment. If we close it too soon, please feel free to add your responses in the chat. And if you're driving, please do not respond. Keep focused on the road. But we'll give folks another few seconds here, maybe three. I don't want to cut anybody off. Two, one, and then I'm going to end the poll and share results here so you can see. So, Stephen, it looks like we've got a good mix. Folks who have been using Civic Muscle, maybe about 40% who are pros. Otherwise, we've got a mix of brand new and getting started. So, welcome everyone. And then on the second question, you all can see a lot of folks, 30% creating stories on film, TV, podcasts. Over half, nearly 70%, shaping narrative through strategy and messaging. Good job. 50% sharing stories to inform and inspire others to action. A good chunk of researchers, and then a few folks who are here to learn and haven't used storytelling before. As always, everyone is welcome. We are really glad that you're here, and I will stop sharing. And with that, Stephen, I want to turn over to you. I will give a question here, but if you'd like to start somewhere else, let me know. I'd love to hear how you personally define bridge building in this moment and what convinced you that storytelling is key to that bridge building.
Well, my definition of bridge buildings relates to my origin story of getting into bridge building in the first place, which starts in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I was a son of immigrants from India, grew up in an area where no one really looked like me or shared my background. And my first passion in life really led to a transformation of how I see the world. And that passion was music. I started playing the guitar in elementary school as well as the drums and started playing in rock bands and around that time. Got into jazz and hip hop and funk and many different genres of music. And that musical experience taught me about the power when different cultures and different types of people come together across our differences. Because if you think about it, each of those genres, hip hop, rock and roll, jazz, all tapped into different subcultures within Milwaukee. And I found that when we would bring these genres together and our audiences together, the art was something that was new and powerful and exciting. It was enriched by our differences, but it was also about the type of space that we created that was very inviting of people's life experiences. So I use that as a premise for a bridge building definition because that's how I come at this. Think about the jazz mode
Mm,
of life, which, by the way, anyone tuning in right now, you can be a jazz artist yourself, even if you don't play any instruments, because jazz is about creating something in real time with other people around you. Jazz modes are all about improvisation. It's about listening. It's about creating a true call and response. And I think that is the kind of bridging we need in our society now more than ever, which is different than having an A position and a B position, dividing by two and meeting at some kind of 50-yard line. This is a bridging that I believe in that is meeting on a new playing field. It's an evolution as opposed to a transaction. And that's how I think about bridging right now. And whether it was my previous work with Future Caucus, bringing young legislators together, or now it's storytelling and Bridge Entertainment Labs, it's done really in that jazz spirit. And I think that's crucial to be getting the majority of Americans on board with this vision and this idea.
I love that. I also have to smile at the notion of people tuning in right now. So glad everyone is,
Nicely
is
done.
here. I can't resist. When you look at the broader pro-democracy and bridging fields, what gap do you see Bridge Entertainment Labs filling?
Two things. One is just a narrative gap that I saw for many years. And, I'm a long time guy in the pro-democracy and pluralism fields, have really been at the center of creating the fields as we currently understand them, as were some of the key folks involved in creating bridge entertainment labs. I see my colleague Kristen Hansen from Civic Health Project is on the Zoom as well. So we've been building this, these fields for a while. And I felt for some time that there was a narrative gap, that we weren't articulating a vision for bridge building or democracy that was compelling enough for the American people. And I found as my different organizations would do events around the country, that this whole jazz idea, the idea of democracy as a jam session, like that type of thing would be like a light bulb for people. If it was just like a transactional bipartisanship, that wasn't really resonating with people. And especially in the context of post 2020, not just with COVID, but George Floyd and conversations around social justice, it was being framed almost at odds with each other, social justice and bridge building. Because if you think about it, a weak kind of bridge building is where we're bringing people together that doesn't invite and dignify our core lived experiences. And on the flip side, if we're pursuing a mission of justice without trying to build diverse coalitions, then we're not actually moving forward. We're spinning our wheels. So I felt like there needed to be a breakthrough in narrative, and that was essential to get into the culture. So that's piece one. The second piece is the research is very clear in showing that storytelling is an unparalleled medium to truly move audiences and create empathy and connection at scale. Really, and as someone who's been in the political world for many years, I can tell you most political debates aren't actually moving people. There are a lot of walls erected in front of people. But rather, if you think about the experience of being in your home or a theater, watching a compelling story and connecting with a character who might have a different lived experience than yourself, that is an unparalleled kind of experience that we have as humans. And I think when I look at the pro-democracy, pro-bridge building kind of fields, the next frontier is culture change.
Mm.
It is narrative change. And to do that at scale, we have to work with the entertainment industry. So we formed Bridge Entertainment Labs to be the entertainment outpost of these movements, and to really marshal the talents and the creativity of these storytellers who have the largest cultural platforms in America into the ideas and values of our movement. And I can say I enjoy being in kind of new audiences and kind of at the leading edge of a certain movement. And it's been a lot of fun really talking about this mission to an audience that had really not thought about it before. And so I really feel like we are carving out new ground here.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. And folks on the call, I see some of our friends from Women in Film and Video and different organizations know I am incredibly partial to film and to television. It's something where you have this experience where, I mean, I suppose you could yell at the screen, but it's not going to do that much good. You're more sitting there, especially in the film in the dark, letting an experience wash over you, and the chance to really have that experience of walking in someone else's shoes, that transformation, the transportation with the different characters. So appreciating that. Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I'd love to dig more into movement building, and let us, and we've got some slides up our sleeve here. If any of them are ever helpful, we
Yes.
can pull those up. But you are freshly back from Sundance. I'm not jealous at all, which where you've seen a shift there. Viewing depolarization work is something that's kind of novel or maybe even controversial. And now, thankfully, we're seeing a more full embrace. What changed both at the film festival and then kind of in the broader culture to make that shift possible?
Well, we first started going to Sundance 3 years ago, and we can maybe pull up that slide. I think it's the fourth slide in our collection of slides from Sundance, just so folks can get a look at what this is. But, Sundance is the film festival that I think more than any other introduces new narratives into the filmmaking industry. And there have been many movements over time that really started at Sundance. And so we thought it was really important to be active and present there to introduce these new narratives around social cohesion, bridge building at Sundance. And what's so interesting, because we, as you mentioned, we just got back from doing two sessions there. The two are represented on screen here. One is called Stories That Unite, and the other uh, on rural storytelling. And we had overflow audiences for both. The energy was just sort of electric. And that to me is very encouraging because just in the last 3 years, we've seen this transformation happen at Sundance. Like when we first started there, this idea of listening to people who are different than you and really involving the stories of the true tapestry of America was not just not talked about really at Sundance, it was controversial because there are questions about, well, who are you listening to? Are we listening to the enemies here? And so I'm really grateful and proud of the Institute itself for partnering with us this past year. And now when I look at where we're at and just the response we had, we've gone from the sidelines to the core conversation at the Sundance Film Festival and by extension the filmmaking industry. And yeah, it's just been really fun to see that progress.
That is exciting. And I want to take a moment. I realize sometimes for folks who are deeply in this space of storytelling, this may be a familiar concept. For other folks, some may tend to use narrative and stories interchangeably. And I just want to explain quickly that I think of stories as the trees and the narrative is that larger forest, or a different way to think about it is the narrative is the way that we're seeing the world. And the narrative itself is often invisible, the way we make sense of different stories, of the things around us. And so while you may have the individual stories, when we're talking about shifting the narrative, that's a much larger way of making sense of the world. Is that accurate, Stephen, or things that you'd add for folks to kind of, as we're talking about narrative, I just want to be clear about the terminology we're using.
I love that metaphor. It's so good. Yeah, I think about stories are sort of these individual pieces, and then the narrative is the collective whole. It's sort of like what's in the zeitgeist, you know? And what one of the questions that drove me into this work is a simple question, and this is based on a collection of experiences I've had working in all 50 states across the country and running for office in Wisconsin is which stories do we choose to tell and how do we
Mhm.
tell those stories?
Yep.
Because that decision leads to what's the meta narrative in our zeitgeist. And once there's a narrative, everything I've seen how the media works. I know later on we'll talk about some of the commentary and work I've done with different media outlets. The way a lot of producers work is seeing how stories fit into the existing narrative. And so the ultimate change here, if you want to see a different kind of story platformed, we have to change the narrative.
Yeah. Yeah, and it would not be a Stories Change Power webinar if I didn't mention at least three times the things that we're going to include in the resources to follow up. But there are some amazing organizations that are working on bigger narratives, including Metropolitan Group that released a pro-democracy narrative playbook, others that we'll be hearing from later this year in our series. So just a promise there for folks who are like, oh, I want to learn more. We will share more. But for now, I'd love to hear, Stephen, like when you think about this movement that you're building in Hollywood, let's look ahead 3, 5 years. What does success look like? And rather than have to wait, I tend to be an impatient person. What signals can we see before we hit 5 years out, like early signals that good things are happening and we're moving in the right direction?
Well, our ultimate goal, I think, is based on success that we've seen already in the industry on other issues or other topic areas. So, for example, about 5 years ago, there was an entire DEI sort of infrastructure that was created in Hollywood. And now there are internal production companies at the major studios that are all focused on underrepresented artists, advancing DEI narratives. And so what that is an industry level choice to dedicate resources, production to a certain lens of story. So 3 to 5 years from now, we want to see that same level of commitment for stories that can unite Americans across our differences.
Mhm.
And I'm excited that we're already seeing the early signs of that. It's not just the community that we've built, it's the biggest Oscar winning filmmakers and storytellers who are choosing to sign up for a mission, or some of the biggest legends in the industry who've led major studios signing up for this mission. It's studios right now, and I know we'll get to studio engagement in a second, who are choosing to dedicate resources to our cause. It's seeing these major institutions, whether it's studios like Paramount or Disney, filmmaking institutions like Sundance Institute. These are major institutions who are shifting in sort of tone to embrace this cause of bridge building and depolarization. And so those are all some early signs that it's becoming a larger part of the zeitgeist.
Hmm.
And one thing that's playing in our favor here is that a storyteller or a creative is naturally going to be an empathetic and curious person. Like they have those genes already inside of them because of the way our division system works. It's sometimes those instincts are suppressed. Our mission is just to bring that to the surface. And so seeing that real-time transformation that happens often on a one-on-one basis with these storytellers, that's been very encouraging and presents, I think, a positive signal that this can become not just an individual person or an individual institution, but an actual industry-wide change.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it's interesting to think about how, without that intentionality, people may think, oh, these stories are neutral. And in fact, they may be inadvertently deepening divides. So at least putting, this lens on the work is so helpful. And it's exciting to hear.
Yeah, it's amazing how many almost, we work with a team of researchers that found that most content we consume has some relevance to government or major political issues facing our society. And so then I was naturally curious going into some of these production companies and studios, where is the space where they can really have that philosophical, deep conversation about what are we representing on screen? And the truth is, there previously just hasn't been a lot of space dedicated to that. There haven't been enough resources
Yeah.
to really be thinking about how we're putting out these stories because, like you mentioned, Piper, without having that extra thought, these stories can actually further polarize our country instead of doing the opposite.
Yeah, yeah. I'll shout out our friends from Democracy 2076 who have done some great work, and we'll hear from them in May. But one a little spoiler there is, would you believe that Ted Lasso may have impact on how we see government, even though it's not a story that's specifically about the government and how it's supposed to work? So it's interesting to think about just how far-reaching stories can be that seem that they're about one topic, but really, shape our attitudes about many other things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was talking about our community. One of my favorite filmmakers in our community is named Morgan Neville, and he won an Academy Award for a film called 20 Feet from Stardom. The way he thinks about it is films are an empathy machine, and
Mm,
every story he tells is through the lens of social cohesion. He has a
yeah.
particular passion for music, so he recently made the film about Pharrell Williams called Piece by Piece. He did
Yes.
an SNL documentary about music. And so for him, he is such a great case in point in how this lens of social cohesion leads to better storytelling. And we'll get into our four C's, our four principles
Mhm.
of doing the storytelling. He's someone who's doing it already, and we just want more filmmakers to embrace those ideas.
I love it. I love it. And I look forward to getting there. Most folks on the call, I'm guessing, have not been inside studios. So I want to get a little, hint of what's going on there for folks to get your perspective. And I'm curious, when you walk into a studio, what are some of the common misconceptions you encounter about bridge building stories? And then how do you reframe and help people see bridge building in a different way?
Yes. Well, first, I think the thing that first struck me going into these studios was just how big of an opportunity there is to reach culture change at scale just by our model is called influencing the influencers. So really working with a few of these executives and storytellers has an outsized impact on our culture because some of these films that we have a good collaboration with Disney and their respective production companies, for example. These films are being seen by 100 million people globally over the course of its
Yeah.
lifetime. So that's a huge, huge impact. Um, this might be a good time to bring up the four C's document. Or actually our values document. Let me start with that. We call this our appetizer. When we're thinking about films, TV shows, other content to identify, we have a list of values that really puts on paper essentially alignment with our mission. And so we don't have to go through all of these, but modeling strong bridge building behavior and embodying pluralism, heterodox kind of stories, and truly reflecting America. This is one that I'll maybe call out a little bit more because natural. This is true of all American society, and entertainment is no exception. A lot of Americans live in echo chambers right now, and that's true with storytellers too. Storytellers are telling a story based on the life experience and access to information that they have. And so we need to create a culture where storytellers are challenging their own biases, are challenging the bubbles that they live in. And that includes choosing where these stories are being sourced from. And so this piece about reflecting America is really important for Americans to be seen and heard in this 250th year of our anniversary. And a big part of what we're doing is really pushing these storytellers to go sort of deeper and deeper into corners of America that they maybe would not have otherwise seen or heard about that are not covered, for example, in the New York Times. And I use that example intentionally because a lot of storytellers that we've talked to, we often ask, so where did you get the idea for the story? And they'll say,
Mhm.
oh, I read an article in the New York Times, or I listened to the daily podcast and heard about this story. And that is a place to source stories, but it's not the only place. And so we really want to broaden that lens.
Mm. I really appreciate that because I'm having, this image of things that are already out in the world coming through the studios and just processed differently, whereas you're wanting to bring in what are the stories that aren't being told? What are the perspectives we're not hearing and really, broaden that conversation. So thinking about then if we're taking stories from the studio out into the world, what do you look for in a project to decide like this is a good fit for your organization?
Yes, well, maybe we'll first go to the four C's slide. So we're very excited about this. It's a new resource, research-backed principles that we just published, launched at the Sundance Film Festival, authored by my colleague Anne Reedy. And oh, sorry, these are the criteria, so it might be just before this. The
Different
four,
C's.
yeah,
Well,
different C's. Yeah, here we go. Curiosity, complexity, contact, and good conflict. And everyone tuning in can scan that QR code and get the full report. But these are the principles that we utilize in working with our storytellers. So just some examples here. Curiosity is all about depicting characters that are modeling how to be curious with people who are different than them, or complexity, where characters are written with depth and nuance and avoiding tropes and stereotypes that further polarize our country. Contact, we were just talking about this idea of breaking out of our bubbles, and then good conflict. We are big proponents of conflict being presented in stories. That's the bread and butter of many stories. But there's a difference between transformative conflict, where you
Mhm.
see some real movement among the characters, versus dead end conflict, where it just ends there and there's no real potential for reconciliation or a recognition of their shared humanity. So a lot more is available through that QR code, but those four C's are really important. And then now we can go to the criteria slide. This is a big part of what we use to evaluate content that we choose to partner with. So they obviously show a commitment to working with us on those four C's. And then we think artistic and excellence is really important. This needs to be a great story. There's no substitute for that. And we want these stories to be viable in the marketplace because the number one way to change the trajectory of stories is to show that they're not just socially impactful, but also economically viable. So that's just some examples.
Yeah, and I'm appreciating that the chat here, Selvi notes that it's important to elevate our understanding of who we are as a country and looking at the long tradition of working together across lines of difference. So thank you for that, Selvi. I mean, it's easy to think like, oh, everything being peaceful is the thing we want to celebrate. And actually it's using that civic muscle and practicing the working across difference. It's so important.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One thinking about this criteria and the four C's, it can maybe help just to think about a concrete example of
Mhm.
something that really embodies all this. one of my favorite examples was a film that premiered at Sundance last year and had a wider release over the summer called East of Wall. This was my favorite film of 2025. The filmmaker is Kate Beecroft. She's part of our community. And this is the case of a director, Kate, who went to South Dakota just basically on a road trip without any story to tell. She said, I'm going to go to this community to listen to find out what that story is. That to me is a jazz mode, as we were talking about earlier. So she's listening, talked to some community members, asking them, what's the story that I need to hear about? Learned about this rancher who kind of defies a lot of expectations and stereotypes of who a rancher is. She's sort of like a punk rock rancher in South Dakota. And so Kate creates a story called East of Wall and then trains the members of the community as actors and actresses to be cast in her film. So the people she's telling the story about
Mhm.
are some of the lead characters in the film that she made. And that to me is so compelling because a big part of our values is telling more nuanced stories, leaning on real lived experiences. Well, you
Mhm.
can't do that any better than what Kate Beecroft did in this case. So I highly recommend East of Wall.
I love it. And we will include that, as you guys can predict if you're webinar regulars, in the resources. So with that, I'm really struck. I mean, you're naming a couple examples of full-length films and resources that are out there. And I'm feeling that the disconnect sometimes with, smaller organizations that don't have the resources to create themselves. And so it feels like there's great things out there. Can you share an example of how, good ways to use these films and series as tools once they're out in the world to really bridge divides rather than thinking, oh, that's entertainment. It's not something that I can use in my work in bridging.
I've generally found that films and TV shows, content in general, is one of the best tools that organizations of all kinds can use to advance their mission. One of the experiences I had going into this role was working with a film called Just Mercy,
Mm,
which is about
yeah.
criminal justice reform, and worked with that film to host screenings with bipartisan groups of legislators all across the country, and it led to 30 bipartisan laws being enacted on the backside of that. Another film that we were more directly involved with is called Elephant in the Room. This is a
Mm-hmm.
romantic comedy where the two main characters are attracted to each other, but find out that they voted for different people in the last election. And seeing the screenings of that film in faith-based locations, all kinds of locations, are prompting real conversations. I've been invited to some of those myself, and I think it's been really effective where you have a screening, which is a shared experience for
Yeah.
people. That's part of the impact right there. And then having a session afterwards where you can have a back and forth with the audience and really take questions almost like a town hall. And that's been really, really useful. So those are a couple examples that come to mind in terms of some bigger releases. So a lot of folks on this call might be familiar with the film Civil War that came out about a year and a half ago. And a lot of folks in our field were concerned that that film could further divisions. And how do you use a film like that to point people to solutions? And so we partnered both with the film to equip some of the key actors, people involved with the film, with the best of the bridging movement. These are the solutions that you need to be aware of. And then vice versa, we activated a lot of bridging organizations to host their own screenings so they can have an honest conversation about how we avoid having a second American Civil War. So I think the theme from all of these examples is the content is the hook for a deeper conversation about what are concrete things we can do to have an impact.
Yeah, and our friends at Listen First, the coalition, have been fabulous with the week of conversation. That's something that we'll share with folks in the resources as well. But such great opportunities to, if if all these the names of films are going by too quickly for folks, don't worry. We'll share that list, and then Listen First has a long list as well to really use, as you're saying, Stephen. Those talkbacks are just so, a chance to reflect together is so powerful.
A great opportunity, and this will be in partnership with Listen First Project, is the Better Together Film Festival. And that's where I encourage everyone to learn more about it and participate later this year. But that's where there's a curated series of films and opportunities for those kind of talkbacks that you're mentioning.
Yeah, love it. Love it. I want to be sure. I mean, I could talk to you about this for hours and hours. We will make sure to save space for questions. I see a few, one in the Q&A. If you have questions, folks, I encourage you put those in the Q&A. It's easy to track them there and make sure they don't get lost in the chat. But I would be remiss if we did not get into the area that's maybe not as entertaining, or it shouldn't be as entertaining, but you do a lot of work where it's with political and media commentary. And I'm curious, when you're on air, what are one or two, really concrete things you do differently to model bridge building in an environment that I think most of us can agree in our political commentary these days, we don't see enough of that.
Well, I think first this kind of commentary where I go on news outlets to kind of break down what's happening in the news is part of the storytelling industry. It's deciding how we frame the issues facing our country. And having this type of platform is great because it's more immediate. Sometimes films and TV shows take years and years to make, but going on TV on a news outlet has a little bit more of an immediate effect on people. And being able to, like, usually the way that I approach these issues is focusing on the issue itself as opposed to party, like getting at the root of what's really going on instead of trying to contort my uh, speech into a partisan narrative, which to probably most people tuning in here sounds completely normal and obvious, except what I just said is completely disruptive to the business model for many news organizations in the way they set up these conversations, which is usually Democratic strategist or hack, as I like to say, Republican strategist or hack, and then they're deciding how to debate these issues when the debate is sort of flawed from the beginning. And so my approach usually is to a sort of answer whatever question is on the table, but really try and elevate the conversation
Mm.
towards a newer way of looking at the issue that maybe scrambles our thought of what left and right is and what some concrete solutions could be. And I think for a lot of more seasoned TV personalities, I find that they're like surprised by this approach because they're not used to nuance
Mm.
in TV commentary and TV storytelling. But I think Americans right now are really starved for nuance instead of partisanship because nuance is a space not only where solutions are, nuance is how most normal, this is how most people talk, just in normal conversation, whether you're at the bar or you're at a family gathering. People are trying to get to that nuanced place, but our political discourse makes us believe that's not possible. So that's a big piece of what I'm fighting up against every time I do TV.
And I'll speak for everybody on the call that we appreciate that. We need more of that. And it's interesting to think how, as a culture, we've moved away to where it can seem surprising that like what's normal is not what we're needing. And I'm
Right.
curious if you could wave a magic wand, I suppose, and have local and national media start to cover politics in a way that bridges divides, that builds civic muscle and connection, rather than what's become our norm of eroding that connection. What would be at that larger level the shifts that you'd recommend?
I think it's really embracing actually a lot of the principles that we have with Bridge Entertainment Labs. It's listening, really trying to listen to what the story is instead of assuming what people want. Having the patience and interest in seeing the nuance and complexity of a story. Bringing on different types of people who aren't part of the partisan apparatus And so I think there's a piece here about story selection and sourcing, which is a huge responsibility. Earlier, we were talking about my experiences walking into these studios. I've kind of had a similar experience walking into these news production rooms and talking with producers. They have a massive responsibility in deciding what stories to choose. So that's a big piece of
Mm,
it. And then the second is, how do we choose to talk about these stories? Are we moving into a reductionist, stereotyped kind of view of these stories? Or are we really opening up the beauty of what people are really going through as it relates to these issues and how people are really talking about it? Again, I go back to the jazz metaphor because I think a jazz approach to storytelling really invites people to fully experience these stories and bring their full selves to the conversation. And so that's the kind of shift I'd like to see.
I love that. And I'm mindful of the fact that on the call we have some smaller organizations. So, looking, I'm hearing a lot of lessons that apply at big studio, big decision level, um, you know, decision making level. I think I missed a word in there, but if you were to take these down to people who are at the smaller communication shops, when they're asking which stories should we choose to tell and how do we tell them, what would your recommendations be?
Yeah, I would encourage anyone who's at a smaller organization, communications shop, really scan that QR code over 4Cs because those we use those mainly to work with storytellers in the entertainment industry, but that can apply to a storyteller of any organization who wants to tell better, more nuanced stories. The other thing I'd point to, and I think these principles naturally lend to what I'm about to say here, is to push back against the tendency to be cynical. There's
Mm,
enough of that already out there, and it's really easy to do cynical stories, to do doom and gloom and apocalypse kind of stories. I think what's harder, but ultimately more important, is to choose the hopeful story, to choose the solution story. And all the research shows that if you do the latter, you're much more likely to get people on board with your cause. If you do the former, which is the skies falling and the world is ending, that just creates this feeling of paralysis and people don't really know what to do with that. There might be some short-term emotional gains in terms of like, yeah, this all sucks. And then you just wallow in your depression. But the alternative of here's what's going on in a nuanced portrayal, and here's the concrete things we can do to create a better future. That's how you get people on board with your cause.
yeah, amen to that. It's something we talk about it in our courses is not just leaving room for hope, but creating room for like really making that a main ingredient in storytelling. Because you're right. I mean, there's plenty of discouraging content out there and reasons to tune out, and we need people to really lean in. I have one more question, and then we'll turn to some of the questions we're seeing in the Q&A and in the chat. But as I mentioned, in 2026, we are focused on helping people build civic muscle. And, we've touched on a lot of things here. I really want to be clear. If someone were to come to you and say, how can I be part of making the United States more just and peaceful for everyone without exception as we look to our next 250 years? What would you tell them?
Wow, that's a big question. I think, and coming from a variety of organizations that may or may not be in the civic space, I'm guessing. So, yeah, I think first, how we get people civically engaged and to work with each other is clearly the challenge of our time and is probably the challenge for all humanity, because this moment we live in is essentially answering the question whether a diverse democracy with people coming from every different background can live, work, and build a society together. And the 250th year is a really important moment to reflect on that and choose which story we want to tell going forward. And I think we've shown many examples over the course of American history that it really is possible. And often I look at those stories and it's a lot of young people at the center of change, whether it's a social movement like civil rights, or whether it's a technological achievement like putting a man on the moon. It's young people working across a lot of different differences around a common goal. And I think that's a really beautiful vision. It's something that really speaks to my own lived experience and my uh, upbringing as a musician. I really want to see a society that has the kind of energy that I saw in the bands that I played in. That's ultimately, I think, what I'm after here in life. And
Yeah.
so I want every organization possible, whether you're explicitly in the space or not, calling on people not just to be civically active, we know that's important, but rather to be exercising our civic bridge building muscles and to see it as a muscle. I think
Yep.
to effectively show up, it's not like you're not going to run a marathon without doing any training. You have to be exercising and doing this as a practice. I think storytelling helps bring people into a practice, but it really falls on a lot of organizations represented here to turn that practice into a norm.
Yeah, yeah, and I've really appreciated the work. Many good thinkers in the field, but I'm thinking right now of Harry Boyd and his work around the fact we've become collectively really good consumers, and our civic muscle is has atrophied in many cases. And so thinking of that as like, okay, let's, step at a time. We're not asking anybody to get up and, run a marathon out of nowhere, but we do need to be building that back up. And this feels like a really important time and opportunity with the 250th to do that. So,
Yeah, it's one reason why I started working with Arnold Schwarzenegger and serve as a senior fellow
yes,
there.
in muscle.
Yeah, no, that was on purpose. It really is. Like I think it's essential for our movement to have a cultural archetype that shows building bridges as strength and strong leadership. Because in the absence of our stories being elevated, the counter narrative is that working across difference is weak, a betrayal of your principles, and a lot of negative stuff. So we got to change that narrative. And I think, like, obviously, I'm doing it more like literally with Arnold, but it really is a muscle, and I want this strong kind of archetype to be in our culture.
Yeah, yeah. And I am going to resist the urge to try to do an impression, but like the idea of every time you show up to say, I'll be back. I'll leave it at
Yes.
that.
Well, he
So
every time he sees me, he calls me the bridge builder.
I love it. I love it. So we've got a question here from the chat. What are some examples of impact and influence that Bell has had in like, is there a particular story told by a studio that comes to mind? And you'd mentioned working with Disney, what does that mean? Can you dig in a little bit more?
Yeah, actually, one really good example I can point to is a series that we helped to premiere at Sundance last year called Bucks County, USA. And this is a film that's co-directed by another Oscar winner named Barry Levinson. And they are telling a story about school boards in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, which has one of the most sort of mixed politically populations in America. And as is happening in many school boards around the country, this one has devolved into a ton of shouting and division, and the whole community has really been split up. We got partnered with them mid-production of this series, fortunately, because then we were able to really invite the storytellers into our movement who wanted to be invited. They're true believers, but didn't necessarily have all the tactics and the how-tos. And so we were able to help contribute that and meaningfully impact, I think, not only how the storytellers view their role, but where the story is going to show more examples of reconciliation and common understanding. We got to really sit down with a number of the participants at Sundance and
Mm,
really kind of shine a light on just their common humanity, where because otherwise many of them were not even on speaking terms. But I think we're able to sort of push that project in a direction of hope and how we can truly listen and talk to each other across difference, even in a story like that where it was initially very disconcerting what was going on, that ultimately they were able to have real friendships and conversations.
fabulous. Fabulous. We have a question here from Matt. Have you seen good examples of bringing together and sustained conversation? Folks who are working in communications media to explore how the storytelling mediums of film and TV can better contribute to the enrichment of human understanding in various fields. For example, the field of bridging. Or do you see a need for such conversations to take place in larger numbers and increasing number of spaces?
Definitely more spaces, more numbers. Yes. I think we need those conversations to happen in all aspects of the storytelling industry, which is both entertainment and news, in my view.
Mhm.
And I think, like people in many jobs, you're just focused on what's in front of you, like your little piece. And we're just trying to expand the perspective to see the larger whole. Like we're talking about the 250th anniversary of America. Like that's a part of the larger whole. What culture do we want in America? What stories and narratives do we want? And that takes extra effort. That's why a group like ours exists, and we certainly need more in the movement, and we definitely need more of those conversations.
Yeah. And I'll encourage folks, we have time for a few more questions. So if there are questions top of mind, please put those in the Q&A. I'd love to hear also from our international folks if there's questions that are coming to mind. I'll ask Stephen, are you aware of movements like this in other countries, or would you say that this is already, this particular movement is having that global reach?
That's a good question. I've heard sort of anecdotes of people who are mission aligned in other countries, but hard to say that if it's truly become like a storytelling movement. I still think in many places it's like a kind of survival mode and just how do we get by.
Mhm.
But that does remind me of an important domestic example that I think is important for people to realize is one of the people on our board is was one of the lead writers of Cheers, the sitcom, kind of
Mhm.
legendary, iconic sitcom. And in the late 80s, early 90s, there was a concerted effort to say that we really want to reduce drunk driving in America and socialize the idea of a designated driver. That they worked with Cheers and a few other shows, but I know Cheers was really the main one, and kind of put that idea of a designated driver out in multiple episodes. And now that is just like a social construct, part of our culture. I think that's a really great example for us to draw upon in this work.
I love that. I'm remembering a conference. I don't remember the exact year. It's been a while, but Cause Placement had a whole conversation around how we can bring causes into to entertainment. Things like if you've ever seen a series that talks about, don't feed honey to babies. I think that might have been on ER or new health research that's available, ways to just infuse that in a way that's more entertaining, but really impactful because it does that the things we see, even when we know it's fiction, still very much shape our perspectives and our knowledge. So
Absolutely.
I'm seeing an example from Kim here, another great example of the film Blood Diamond
Hmm.
around the conflict diamonds. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And both documentary scripted can have an impact on the documentary side of film, like the social dilemma really put out there,
Yeah.
the concerns around social media. We call that more explicit storytelling. Implicit would be more of a like the designated driver example in Cheers, a scripted piece that has some of these messages weaved in, not in a way that's like propaganda. It's more just
Mhm.
enhancing the story and then allowing this impact to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so important because I think that there are times as nonprofits, I'll pick on ourselves here a little bit. There's an inclination to be a little preachy. People shouldn't drive drunk, so we're just going to tell them you shouldn't drive drunk, and it's like asking people to eat their vegetables or
Right.
watch something. Nobody wants to watch a lecture. They do want to watch Cheers. They do want to hear really powerful stories. So if we can weave in those messages, there's a lot of power in that.
That's right.
We have time for a few more questions. I'm going to encourage people, and I love this, Chris. Need to drop my soapbox at the door, don't we all? I mean, we're all so passionate about things, and it needs to not get in the way of being entertaining as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Can I just say on that
yeah,
point, I think
absolutely.
because we naturally get a lot of incoming from both the entertainment industry as well as from the bridging world. A
Hmm.
lot of what we get from the bridging world is super explicit ideas for documentaries and or projects in that line. And we believe as much. Look, no one's, as Arnold Schwarzenegger calls me, I'm the bridge builder, right? So I love this stuff. But if it's only about bridge building, that has really limited appeal. The reason why we formed this effort is to truly pierce into the zeitgeist, into the culture in a larger way, and try and reach people like who I grew up with in Wisconsin right now, who have two kids at home. They're going to their job. They barely have time to follow the news, but they might watch a half an hour of Netflix at night. Like, we need to build a movement that's reaching people who are not political junkies, but are just living their everyday lives.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. I'm going to see if I can sneak in two questions here. We've got one from Roshan asking if you're seeing any real uptick in interest from Hollywood for, following on the impact campaigns that are attached to the bridging efforts that you're doing.
Yeah, I think so. I think the impact campaigns generally have become understood in Hollywood for a range of issues. We're now, introducing an additional vertical for them to consider. I think the impact is definitely nice in the lens of the industry, but what's even better is just the product itself being excellent and a success.
Yeah.
And the industry is like a copycat industry. So now that you mentioned Ted Lasso did really well. Now, like, that creates a tone shift in and kind of a genre shift in how Hollywood looks at things. So we need more examples like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll put another question and then one tag along. There's a question here. If you're tracking other ideas, I think this was similar to the Cheers and not drunk driving. Any ideas that you're trying to see socialized over time? And then what will be my very last question, if you want people to remember just one thing from all the things we've covered today, what would that one thing be? Oop, let's see. Get you unmuted here.
There we go. Here we are. Um, Sorry, I missed the last part of your question.
Yeah, the last part, so first was any ideas that we're trying to socialize, and then the last is if everybody is going to remember just one thing from all the amazing things we've covered today, what would that one thing be?
Ooh, well, I'll start with that last one. Just one word, nuance. We want more nuanced storytelling, and we need to create culture change at scale. So I hope that's the main takeaway from this conversation. In terms of ideas that we want to socialize, I think one core motivation, me and our organization, is just seeing how many friends and families have broken up basically over politics over the
Mm,
last 5 to 10 years. And I have this concept I talk about, the division industrial complex, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry that makes money on us hating each other all the time. And I always tell people, like, splitting up with your family member or friend who you've loved for many years is really not worth it. Like, the division industrial complex doesn't deserve that kind of space in your life. And so, really, the idea I want to socialize or normalize is the idea of friends and family who can disagree on any issue and still love each other. One of our board members has worked with the show The Conners over the years, and the
mm.
Conners really put that into action where they disagreed on COVID related things, or, how many people really, split up over just masking issues. And they showed how kind of depicting you can still have that conversation. They can make jokes and kind of have some humor around those disagreements, that they still love each other and can move forward. We need more of that depiction, not only in our shows, but socialized across America.
Yeah. Yeah. What a beautiful thing to end on. I think that's so important. Folks recognizing that there's this larger industrial complex that's benefiting we as individuals, the relationships we have, that the stuff of life is too important to split up over, the issues that we're seeing being so divisive. So with that, Stephen, thank you so much for your insights
Thank you.
today, for all of the work that you're doing. Thank you everyone for joining us. There's so much good conversation going on in the chat as well. We'll include those resources. Join us in March. We've got Civity joining us to talk about the importance of relationship building, and we'll have that coming into the chat as well. And then lastly, there's a poll that will pop up. We would love to hear your feedback. That's always helpful in informing the series. Until then, everyone, be well, do good, stay happy and hopeful, and we will see you again soon.
Thank you.